For nearly a century, the town existed for one reason: coal. Everything here revolved around the mine. The long black trains that left before sunrise. The rumble of trucks moving through narrow streets. The constant hum of machines working beneath the earth. For generations, the mine was more than an employer. It was the town's identity. Families built their lives around it. Fathers taught their sons how to work underground. Local diners opened before dawn to serve miners heading to early shifts. The school football team was called the Miners. The town had grown around a single industry, and for a long time, it worked. Thousands of workers passed through the mine gates every day. Small businesses thrived along Main Street. Houses were full. Schools were crowded. It was the kind of town where almost everyone knew someone who worked underground. But industries built on a single foundation often share the same fate. And one winter morning, everything changed. The announcement came quietly. A short statement from the mining company's headquarters. Production costs were rising. Global energy markets were shifting. Demand for coal had been declining for years. The mine would close. Not slowly. Not over several years. Immediately. After nearly 90 years of operation, the mine that built the town would shut down within 6 months. At first, many people refused to believe it. The mine had survived recessions, labor strikes, energy shortages, generations of economic change. People assumed this announcement would pass like the others. But this time it didn't. Within weeks, equipment began disappearing from the mine. Heavy machinery was removed. Trucks stopped arriving. Sections of the underground tunnels were sealed. And slowly, the truth became impossible to ignore. The town's only industry was disappearing. When the final shift ended, hundreds of workers walked out of the mine gates for the last time. Some had worked there for 30 years. Others had only recently started their careers. But they all faced the same future. Uncertainty. The economic shock spread quickly. Without the mine's payroll, local businesses began struggling almost immediately. Restaurants lost customers. Hardware stores saw fewer sales. Property values dropped. Families began leaving. Moving trucks appeared on quiet streets. Houses went up for sale. Shops closed earlier and earlier each evening. Within 2 years, nearly a third of the town's population had gone. The mine entrance, once crowded with workers, stood silent behind locked gates. People started saying something that echoed through the region. The town is finished. Places like this rarely survive when their main industry disappears. History had shown it again and again. Mining towns collapse when the mines close. But while many people were leaving, one person was paying attention to something others ignored. His name was Daniel Carter. Daniel Carter was 36 years old, a mechanical engineer who had grown up just outside the town. His father had spent 25 years working inside the coal mine before retiring early due to a back injury. Daniel understood what the mine meant to the community. He had grown up hearing stories about life underground, about the teamwork miners relied on, about the pride people felt knowing their work powered entire cities. But Daniel had chosen a different path. Instead of working in the mine, he studied engineering and eventually built a career designing industrial machinery for manufacturing companies in larger cities. For years, he had watched the coal industry decline. He had seen the numbers. Energy markets were changing. Environmental regulations were tightening. New technologies were replacing old ones. Daniel knew something the town did not want to accept. The coal industry was not coming back. But when he returned home one autumn afternoon, something about the empty mine caught his attention. The facility was enormous. Miles of underground tunnels, massive industrial buildings, rail connections, heavy power infrastructure, large transport roads designed for mining trucks. Most people looked at the site and saw a dead industry. Daniel saw something else. Infrastructure. Infrastructure that had taken decades to build. Infrastructure that could support something entirely different. Standing near the silent mine entrance, Daniel studied the enormous steel structures rising above the valley. The processing plant, the rail yard, the maintenance workshops. And slowly, a question formed in his mind. What if the town didn't need another mine? What if the infrastructure could support a completely different industry? It was an idea that sounded almost ridiculous. Coal towns did not reinvent themselves. They disappeared. But Daniel couldn't ignore what he was seeing. The rail lines could transport heavy goods. The industrial buildings could house large equipment. The power grid designed for mining operations could support major manufacturing facilities. And the town still had something else. A workforce. Hundreds of people experienced in operating heavy machinery, maintaining equipment, and managing industrial systems. The more Daniel thought about it, the more the idea began to grow. Maybe the mine's closing wasn't the end of the town's story. Maybe it was the beginning of something else. But turning that idea into reality would require something far more difficult than imagining it. It would require convincing others, investors, engineers, companies, and most importantly, an entire town that had already begun to lose hope. Because Daniel Carter was about to suggest something almost no one believed was possible, replacing coal with a completely new industry. And if he failed, the town would disappear for good. When Daniel Carter first explained his idea, the reactions were almost always the same. Silence, then skepticism, and sometimes quiet laughter. Replacing a coal mine was not something towns simply did. Mines created entire local economies. Once they disappeared, the communities built around them usually followed. But Daniel wasn't trying to bring coal back. He was thinking about something very different. Energy, not the kind pulled from underground, but the kind built above it. For years, Daniel had worked in industrial manufacturing plants across several states. During that time, he had watched something interesting happen. Energy companies were changing. Wind farms were expanding across rural landscapes. Solar installations were appearing across former industrial land. Governments were offering incentives for renewable infrastructure projects. And one industry in particular was growing faster than anyone expected: wind turbine manufacturing. Modern wind turbines were enormous machines. The towers alone could reach heights taller than skyscrapers. Their components were massive steel towers, giant nacelles housing generators, and blades longer than airplane wings. Building these machines required something very specific: large industrial facilities, rail connections, heavy power infrastructure, and a workforce skilled in mechanical systems. Exactly the kind of infrastructure the coal mine had already created. Daniel began researching the possibility. The mine's processing plant buildings could be converted into turbine assembly facilities. The rail yard could transport turbine towers to wind farm sites across the region. The heavy equipment workshops could manufacture and repair industrial components. And perhaps most importantly, the town's former miners already possessed valuable skills: operating heavy machinery, maintaining complex mechanical systems, working in dangerous industrial environments. The more Daniel studied the idea, the more realistic it began to look. But turning an idea into reality required something far more difficult: investment. Converting a coal facility into a manufacturing hub would cost millions. And convincing investors to bet on a dying mining town was not an easy conversation. Daniel spent months traveling between cities, meeting with energy companies and manufacturing executives. Most meetings ended quickly. The same concerns appeared again and again. The town was too remote. The workforce was shrinking. The local economy was unstable. And the mine's reputation as a declining industry town made investors nervous. But Daniel refused to give up. He kept refining his proposal. Instead of presenting the town as a former mining community, he started describing it differently: as an industrial site ready for reinvention, a location where infrastructure already existed, where manufacturing space could be created faster and cheaper than building new facilities from scratch. Eventually, one meeting changed everything. It was a small renewable energy manufacturing company looking to expand production of wind turbine components. They had been searching for a location large enough to assemble turbine towers. But most industrial zones near major cities were too expensive. When Daniel showed them the abandoned mine facilities, they were surprised. The buildings were enormous. The rail yard connected directly to major freight lines. The heavy-duty roads built for mining trucks could easily support turbine transport vehicles. And the local workforce was eager for new opportunities. For the first time since the mine had closed, someone looked at the town and saw potential. The company agreed to explore the possibility. But there was still one problem: the town itself. Many residents were skeptical about the idea of replacing the coal industry with renewable energy manufacturing. Coal had built their community. Generations of families had worked in the mine. To some, the idea of wind turbines replacing coal felt like abandoning their history. Daniel understood that concern. He knew the mine represented pride, identity, and decades of hard work. So he made one thing very clear during community meetings: this wasn't about erasing the past. It was about protecting the future. The town needed jobs, and those jobs needed to come from somewhere. Slowly, attitudes began to shift. Former miners attended training programs to learn new mechanical skills related to turbine assembly. Local contractors began repairing the mine's industrial buildings. Rail lines were inspected and restored. And after months of negotiations, the renewable energy company made its decision. They would build their new turbine manufacturing facility in the town. For the first time since the mine had closed, real construction began again. Crane trucks returned. Industrial equipment arrived. The silent mine complex started filling with workers. At first, only a few dozen people were hired. But something had changed. The town that had been slowly fading away suddenly had a new possibility. And Daniel Carter's idea, the one that once sounded impossible, was about to begin transforming the entire region. Because what happened next would prove that a town built on coal could build something entirely different. And this time, the future would be powered by the wind. In the first months after construction began, the town still felt uncertain. People had seen promises before. Mining companies had made announcements that never materialized. Outside investors had talked about redevelopment projects that quietly disappeared. Many residents waited to see if this would be any different. At first, the changes were small. Construction crews repaired the old processing buildings. Rusted conveyor systems were removed. Sections of the facility were redesigned to hold massive turbine assembly lines. The coal mine's towering structures slowly transformed into something new. Where coal had once been sorted and transported, giant steel turbine towers were now being assembled. Where miners once clocked in for underground shifts, technicians began arriving to operate precision manufacturing equipment. The same industrial infrastructure that once supported coal extraction was now supporting renewable energy production. For many former miners, the transition was emotional. Some had spent decades underground. Working in a turbine factory was very different. But the skills they had developed in the mine proved valuable. Mechanical knowledge, heavy equipment operation, safety discipline, team coordination in demanding industrial environments. Training programs helped workers learn the new systems. Within a year, the factory employed more than 100 people. For a town that had been steadily losing jobs, it was the first real sign of recovery. But the real transformation began during the second year. The renewable energy industry was growing faster than anyone expected. Wind farms were expanding across the country. Governments were increasing renewable energy targets. Energy companies were ordering more turbines than manufacturers could produce. The small facility Daniel helped bring to town suddenly faced a new problem. Demand. Orders kept increasing, and the factory needed to expand. The company announced plans to build additional assembly lines inside the old mine complex. New equipment arrived. More workers were hired. Former miners who had moved away began hearing about the new jobs. Some of them came back. Houses that had sat empty for years were suddenly occupied again. The grocery store that had nearly closed started seeing customers return. Restaurants extended their hours. The school district gained new students. The town that once believed its future had disappeared with the coal mine began discovering something unexpected. Reinvention. By the third year, the turbine manufacturing facility had become one of the largest employers in the region. Massive steel tower sections were produced inside the renovated mine buildings. From there, the components were loaded onto specialized rail cars in the old mining rail yard. The same rail lines that once transported coal now carried wind turbine towers to construction sites across the country. It was a transformation few people could have imagined. The town that once powered cities with coal was now helping power them with renewable energy. And the economic impact continued growing. New businesses started appearing around the town. Engineering contractors, maintenance service companies, logistics firms, training centers for renewable energy technicians. Each new company created more jobs. Each new job brought more families back to the area. Within 5 years, the town's population had stabilized. Then something even more remarkable happened. It began growing. Young engineers moved to the town for work in renewable energy manufacturing. Former miners trained as turbine technicians. Students who once believed they would need to leave town to find careers suddenly had opportunities close to home. The transformation extended beyond the factory. Main Street began changing too. New cafes opened where closed shops once stood. A technology training center opened in a renovated building near the town square. Local schools introduced engineering and renewable energy programs to prepare students for new careers. The town that once depended entirely on coal had developed a completely different identity. An energy town, but not the kind anyone expected. By the 7th year, the turbine manufacturing facility had expanded across much of the former mine property. More than 500 people worked there. The rail yard operated daily shipments. The industrial buildings once built for coal extraction had become one of the region's most important renewable energy manufacturing hubs. And Daniel Carter, the engineer who first imagined the possibility, still worked quietly behind the scenes. He rarely appeared in public interviews. When journalists asked him how he had predicted the town's transformation, he always gave the same answer. He didn't predict the future. He simply saw opportunity in infrastructure others had written off. The mine had not been useless after it closed. It had been waiting for someone to imagine a different use for the things it left behind. The rail lines, the buildings, the power grid, the skilled workers. All the pieces had already been there. They just needed a new purpose. Today, if you drive through the town early in the morning, the scene looks very different from the quiet streets that followed the mine's closure years ago. Workers arrive before sunrise. Freight trains move through the rail yard carrying massive turbine components. Industrial cranes rise above the old mine complex, now filled with manufacturing activity. And on the hills outside town, something new has appeared. Wind turbines. Tall white towers turning slowly in the morning breeze. Machines built inside the very town that once believed its future had disappeared underground. The coal mine is still there. Its entrance sealed. Its tunnels silent. A reminder of the industry that built the town. But nearby, a new industry is moving. One that did not replace the town's past. It grew from it. Because sometimes, the end of one industry is not the end of a place. Sometimes it's the beginning of the next chapter.